If you'll go ahead and turn in your notes to page 7, as you're turning, can you see this picture here? It looks kind of just like a blob with a dark blue something in the center. These are cheek cells, and we're going to get to look at your cheek cells this year. Remember, we're in biology class. We're trying to learn about living things like your cells. But we're kind of stuck here in this chemistry part where we're talking about molecules. But remember, if we ask what you are built of, we'd answer cells. But if we ask what your cells are built of, we're going to come back to these 4 macromolecules: proteins, carbs, lipids, and nucleic acids. And so this dark part here, that's the nucleus. What is the nucleus made of? Nucleic acids. And so we're going to be talking about these 4 important molecules. Now we call them macromolecules because they are large. But we also call them polymers. Poly means many, because these are many pieces put together. We're going to be learning that these big molecules like nucleic acids, DNA, they're made of tiny little pieces called subunits or monomers. And so we're going to be learning the tiny units, like a nucleotide, and how we can put nucleotides together to build DNA. It's interesting because your cheek cells, did you know they reproduce about every 6 weeks? Where does this cell come from? We have to make a whole new cell. You have to get more DNA. Well, where do you get more DNA? Turns out you have to find the monomer, the nucleotide, from the food you eat. So this is why it's so important to choose the food you eat carefully, because the food that you eat gets broken down and reused to build your cells. So we're talking about these 4 important molecules. We're going to learn how to get them in your body and how to test for them using what's called an indicator. Remember, a molecule is where we put atoms, like a hydrogen atom, together with other things to form molecules. The first molecule that we're going to talk about is a carbohydrate. A carbohydrate is atoms of CH and O arranged into a polygon monomer called a monosaccharide. That's a complex sentence with lots of new words. We do know what CH and O are. And so if you look at this picture down here, you can see C's and H's and O's. And it's arranged into a shape. And this is a monosaccharide. Now this monosaccharide is called glucose, like sugar, like basic sugar. And so it has only CH and O, and it's in this shape, and that's the monomer, or the small unit. Small or subunit. And that is called a carbohydrate because it's made of carbon, carb, O, oxygen, and hydrogen. And so monosaccharides are the smallest of them. Examples of small carbs are glucose and sucrose, which is a disaccharide. Why do we need glucose and sucrose? Well, they are quick energy sources for your cell. So if your cell needs to do something, like move something in the cell or contract a muscle, we want quick energy. And these are so small, it's easy to break them down. But your body also has larger carbohydrates in them, such as starch and glycogen. These are for longer energy because they are bigger. Now this just shows 4, but starch is sometimes thousands of pieces long. Now remember, we have a better word for pieces here. We have the word monomer, the word subunit, or because we're specifically talking about monosaccharides, this polysaccharide shows 1, 2, 3, 4 monosaccharides joined together. And it's bigger and longer, which means it takes longer to break it down which means it gives you longer energy. Now, just a side note, starch is only found in plants. So when you eat a potato, you're eating starch. When you eat a carrot, you're eating starch. Now, glycogen is how animals store their energy. And so a lot of times these longer energies get stored for later. Where does the energy in a potato get stored? Underground as starch. Where does the energy in an animal get stored? Actually in your liver. So what they all have in common is they're made of CH and O, monosaccharide, disaccharide, polysaccharide. They're all made of CH and O in these particular shapes. Notice the shape is pretty much the same all across. There's another example called cellulose. And cellulose is in plant cell walls. Now, if you remember, all organisms have a cell membrane, but plants also have a cell wall. This is what makes them stand up straight. If we want to test if there's a carbohydrate present, we use something called the Benedict's indicator. Benedict's indicates if glucose is present. Now, glucose, remember, is a monosaccharide. And it will turn from blue to orange if we boil it. We have another indicator that tests for starch, and it turns from yellow-orange to blue-black. So this slide, this set of notes is really important because it introduces you to our first macromolecule, carbohydrates, which sounds really familiar to you already. You already know about carbohydrates, but did you know that they're made of CH and O, and that's where the name comes from? And did you know that some are short energy and some are long energy? And that there's a special type that's in plant cell walls? These are things that we need to know. We're learning about living organisms and what makes them up. And it turns out that living organisms always have carbohydrates, either as an energy source or to provide structure in the cell. You do need to know how to test for it because we're going to do a lab where I'm going to give you a mystery sample and you're going to tell me what's in it. We're going to go ahead and learn about another macromolecule called lipids. We learn about carbs and lipids together because they're both made of CHO, CH and O. But lipids are formed into a molecule called a triglyceride. They have long tails called fatty acids. The fatty acids can be saturated or unsaturated. The unsaturated fatty acids form kinks. So let's take a second and think if you know what a lipid is. Lipids are things like oils. So olive oil is an example of a lipid. Did you know that the oil from your meats is also a lipid? So we have this idea of fats and oils. So if you cook bacon or sausage, and it's an oil that comes off of it. However, we do want to know, right? You might have heard of saturated and unsaturated fats. Unsaturated fats are liquid at room temperature. If you leave olive oil out, it'll stay a liquid. If you leave bacon grease out, it becomes a solid at room temperature. So lipids are going to be important sources of energy. They're stored by both plants and animals, and they can serve as insulation as well. This is where we want to put a big exclamation point. Both carbs and lipids are sources of energy. And so that's interesting. Carbs are made of CH and O, and they're an energy source. Lipids are made of CH and O, and they're an energy source. But as you can see, they're built differently. Look at this picture in your handbook of the circle with the little tails coming down. These are lipids. They don't look anything like a carbohydrate. Because one of the most important jobs of a lipid is actually to form the cell membrane. This isn't just any lipid. This phospholipid. And when we put phospholipids together, they'll form the cell membrane. The most important type of lipid is a phospholipid. Phospholipids' unique shapes form the cell membrane around the outside of every single cell. So as we're trying to learn about living things and we want to know, what is a cell made of? One of the things that cells are made of are lipids. And you need to know that lipids are made of CH&O and that they have these tails that can either be flat or kinked, meaning they have a bend in them. And this actually helps your cell membrane remain what we call fluid, which means it can kind of move a little bit. If they're all flat and they're all stacked up, then they're not able to be as fluid or move. And we want our cell membranes to be a little bit fluid. If we want to test for fats, it turns out that you'll just be testing for oil. The indicator for lipids is a brown paper bag. Lipids get absorbed by the brown paper bag and leave a transparent spot. This is actually the end of this section, and so you'll find a summary box. In the summary box, I'd like for you to compare. Compare means how they're similar, and contrast. Two things. But I'm just going to put ... Because maybe you want to compare lipids and carbohydrates. But maybe you want to compare small carbs and big carbs. Either way is fine. Pick something from this section and both compare them, find how they're similar, and contrast them, find how they're different. We're stopping here because we just want to practice carbs and lipids. So make sure that you're going back to review or summarize those notes.